Welcome to the Jean McCaughey Oration. This year we have the pleasure of inviting Professor Hugh Taylor to our oration, and he's going to talk about closing the gap for vision. My name is Richard Chenall and I'm the Acting Director for the Centre for Health Equity in the Melbourne School of Population and Global Health. And welcome to the University of Melbourne, welcome to friends and colleagues, and welcome to the McCaughey family members who are here this evening. I'm going to hand over to Kerry Arabina, who's our Chair for Indigenous Health and Director of the Indigenous Health Equity Unit at the University of Melbourne. Other people might know Kerry as the Executive Director for the First 1,000 Days Australia, or perhaps as the President of the International Association of Ecology and Health, amongst many other titles, but I'm going to hand to Kerry for an acknowledgement of country. And of course, this week is a very special week. It's NAIDOC week, so over to you, Kerry, to have a talk. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for your time and attention this evening. As we've heard, my name is Kerry, and thank you so much for the warm introduction, Richard. As is our custom, I'd just like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today, the Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nations, and pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and also to thank those very same elders for growing up the next generation of emerging leaders who are truly, in the context of treaty, taking their place and making a very strong contribution to the health and well-being of their own communities, but also for all of us. It has been NAIDOC Week, which celebrates Because of Her We Can. Across the university, many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff and students and community members have had the opportunity to be enriched this week through many, many activities of celebration. The theme, Because of Her We Can, speaks to the significant roles that women have played and continue to play as leaders, trailblazers, politicians, activists and social change agents who have righted wrongs and stood up for the rights of all people, including our own people, to access and exercise justice, equal rights, law, access to education, employment, and to maintain and celebrate our culture, language, music and art. These women are our mothers, our elders, our grandmothers, aunties, sisters and our daughters. They are in this room, they are at this university and speaking to you now. Because of her and because of all of us, we all can. We've had the opportunity this week to have women's discussions with June Oscar, who is our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner. We've been visited by Ngangkaris. We've had a ball celebrating the achievements of the Victorian community and had presentations about treaty advancement from Jill Gallagher, who is the Treaty Advancement Commissioner here in the state. And many of us have been able to get on with the job of just achieving justice, achieving equity and improving lives. For our work in First 1,000 Days Australia, we were fortunate enough this week to reintroduce the Welcome Baby to Country protocols to Deception Bay, where over 21 infants were welcomed by the elders of that place for the first time in over 80 years. Mostly single mums brought their children forward, and some were lucky enough to have both the mothers and fathers there to celebrate this incredible gift of the children who were born on that place. But there is no doubt in my mind that a great number of women are growing up their children, caring for their families, maintaining our homes and breaking down cultural and institutional barriers and gender stereotypes, while doing it tough. But this practice of doing First 1,000 Days work and re-engaging with culture and the engagement around this work has been phenomenally empowering for the people whose lives we touch. And my life and the life of many others who work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, you just can't help but be touched. There is something about the work in the space where you can bring your intellect and your discipline to the table and realise that it is just not as valuable as an open heart, a genuine smile, authentic engagement where deep listening is highly regarded and passion seemed beautiful. Much of my work at the moment happens outside of the university, as does much of the orators for this evening's event. Our out-facing effort has its roots deep within the Centre for Health Equity, in the School for Population and Global Health, which has for decades contributed to the public health and wellbeing outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We're able to reflect on this contribution today, first by bringing some of our partners and collaborators to the university to launch the More Than a Landlord project report, which has come about from a partnership with Aboriginal Housing Victoria, who themselves recently became the stewards of $26 million worth of public assets and wanted to change the nature of their relationships with their tenants. This partnership has seen tenants define their aspirations, work with life coaches, and to date, in a 4-month period, they've been involved with over 100 tenants and achieved over 200 life goals for this group of people. And it's a testament to working with strengths, not deficits. And for those tenants who've become peer researchers, they themselves have transitioned into full-time work and into businesses, and we are very proud of this collaboration. The second wonderful event from the Centre for Health Equity through the school is the presentation tonight by Professor Hugh Taylor on closing the gap for vision, and the tireless efforts of the eye health unit here, who have, from a very, very small team of dedicated people, literally changed a national healthcare system, transformed the lives of families and those affected by blindness, and skilled up a couple of generations of professionals that support and make up the eye health workforce, as well as getting important infrastructure to homes, where that level of support is critical, and in 2018 should be both expected and taken for granted in modern Australian society, but in many instances this is not the case. Professor Hugh Taylor is a champion of mine. For those of you who know him, he is a tireless advocate who is never so relaxed as when he is out on country, working alongside people for whom he has a great deal of respect and stepping us all through his paces. His brother moves very quickly most of the time. I first became aware of Hugh's work when in Central Australia a couple of decades ago I supported the Australian Defence Force put in place a makeshift hospital to do cataract surgery. I learnt so much through those early weeks and saw what a well-skilled, well-resourced company of people could do in a short space of time. And there are very few things that give as much pleasure as seeing someone see again. But unlike the wonderful workers in the ADF, Hugh Taylor and his team follow people back to their homes, working on the prevention and the primary health care, as well as ensuring the adequacy of the tertiary responses while addressing the systemic issues and those much closer to home. I will hold back on doing an ode to Hugh Taylor, although he probably does deserve one. But every time I hear Hugh Taylor talking, I cannot help but think this. Amazing grace, how sweet that sound, that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. Hugh Taylor shows that sometimes we need more than eyes to see, we need vision. And it is so pleased for all of us here, Hugh, that you have vision in spades, my friend. Thank you to the McCaughey family for supporting this oration, and to all of you for making your time available. And for Hugh Taylor, thank you, good sir, for all the wonderful work that you do and bring peace into the world. And thank you all for your time and for engaging this wonderful talk. Happy NAIDOC to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kerry. This is an event that I think we've now held 3 times, and our school has a very special connection to the McCaughey family, and at one time that was very close to us in the formation of the McCaughey Centre. And so I've only been at the university for a short time, and I felt that it was important that we just understand a little bit about our connection to the McCaughey family and the McCaughey Centre that used to exist within our school. And I've invited John Wiseman to come, who was the foundation director of the McCaughey Centre, to come and tell us a little bit about our connection to the McCaughey family and the McCaughey Centre. So over to you, John.
Thank you, Richard.
I've got to do a slide.
A slide, indeed. You're right.
Sorry.
So I'm really delighted to be able to say just a few words to provide some context for tonight's McCaughey Oration to be delivered by Professor Hugh Taylor. The Jean McCaughey Oration commemorates, of course, the life and work of Jean McCaughey, but the Oration series also builds on the work of the McCaughey Vic Health Centre for the Promotion of Mental Health and Community Wellbeing, which was named in honour of both Jean and her husband, the Reverend Davis McCaughey. So I first encountered Jean McCaughey's work on the consequences and sources of poverty as a result of research she helped lead in the 1970s while working with Professor Ronald Henderson at the Melbourne Institute of Applied Economic and Social Research. And Jean went on to lead many influential applied research and writing projects on poverty and injustice, domestic violence and homelessness, community health and wellbeing. Her many outstanding organisational contributions included her work as a research fellow with the Australian Institute for Family Studies, a board member of the Royal Melbourne Hospital, Vice President of the Victorian Council of Social Service, and co-founder of the social justice advocacy coalition People Together. In her role as wife of the Governor of Victoria, Jean was patron at that time of over 100 community organisations. I would also like to just briefly acknowledge also the life and work of Jean's husband, the Reverend Davis McCaughey, who was also a wonderfully insightful and inspiring writer and orator, who drew on his extensive scholarship to highlight the importance of respectful understanding of the diverse sources of learning and wisdom in building a just and prosperous Australian society. In addition to his key role in the establishment of the Uniting Church, Davis's many contributions to public life in this country include his work as Master of Ormond College, Deputy Chancellor of the University of Melbourne, and Governor of Victoria from 1986 to 1992. When I was appointed Director of the Vic Health Centre for the Promotion of Mental Health and Community Wellbeing at the Melbourne School of Population Health in 2006, I formed the view, in discussion with others, that naming the centre in honour of Jean and Davis McCaughey would send a powerful signal about the commitment of the centre to research and knowledge for the common good. Jean was most gracious in support for this proposal and in her willingness to become founding patron of the McCaughey Centre. Between 2006 and 2016, researchers and students associated with the McCaughey Centre produced an extensive body of high-quality applied research which has created a significant and lasting legacy of knowledge and understanding about the social, economic and environmental determinants of mental health and community wellbeing. I certainly don't have time tonight to mention all of the many hundreds of people who contributed to the McCaughey Centre's work, but I would like to acknowledge the outstanding contributions of two people: my successor as McCaughey Centre Director, Professor Billy Giles Cortai, and the founding director of the Jack Brockhoff Child Health and Wellbeing Program, the late Professor Elizabeth Waters. I'd also like to acknowledge the members of the McCaughey family who are with us tonight, and on behalf of the Melbourne School of Population and Global Health, express my appreciation for your ongoing support for this oration series. I imagine those of us who knew Jean and Davis McCaughey remember them in many ways: as kind and loving parents and grandparents, as warm and generous friends and colleagues, and, in my view, as two great Australian public intellectuals who consistently demonstrated the importance and the power of a sustained, lifelong commitment to ethically principled and courageous action, underpinned and informed by rigorous inquiry and thoughtful reflection. It does strike me when I scan the media in Australia and indeed in other parts of the world that these are times in which we could well do with many more public intellectuals with the insightful wisdom and moral courage of Jean and Davis McCaughey. And of course, Professor Hugh Taylor sets an outstanding and important example in the same legacy. So, in concluding, I'd also like to note exactly how honoured I am to be invited to help set the scene for tonight's oration by Hugh Taylor. I have the highest regard for his outstanding contributions to research on actions needed to improve eye health outcomes for Indigenous Australians, and I very much look forward to hearing his address. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. So before I hand over to Hugh, just to add a few small notes of my own, I was sent Hugh's quite massive CV before the event, and I had the pleasure of perusing it. And I noted that we almost lost you, Hugh, twice in your academic career, which I thought was quite interesting. I mean, you've won many awards in your career, including being a finalist in the Senior Australian of the Year Award, and also the Australian of the Year Award. You're a Fellow of the Australian Academy of Health and Medical Science. You're a Melbourne Laureate Professor, and most notably, you were awarded the Companion in the General Order of the Order of Australia in 2001. Hugh went to Scotch College as a young fella, and then went on to study medicine and surgery at the University of Melbourne. But I noted that your 1969 Bachelor of Medical Science honours thesis was about transplantation immunity. So we almost lost you down that path. But luckily in 1979, your doctorate was about vision of Australian Aboriginal people. So obviously you found your calling very, very early on in your career. But after that, you took up in the mid to late 1970s, you're at the ophthalmic register at the Royal Victorian and Ear Hospital here in Melbourne, but we almost lost you for the second time, I noted, and I'd be very interested for you to reflect on this perhaps if you can, but in 1975, Hugh was a medical officer, and excuse my terrible French, for the Expédition Polaire Française in Antarctica. And I noticed that your first publication was actually a letter in the Medical Journal of Australia, and it was entitled Antarctic Medicine. So we almost lost you to the Antarctic. But thankfully, Hugh returned for a while and was working in Australia, but we did actually lose you to the States for quite a long time, where in 1976, Hugh travelled sorry, not in 1976, was it 1977 perhaps? 1977 we lost you to the Johns Hopkins and to the US, where Hugh had various positions in the School of Medicine and then the School of Hygiene and Health at Johns Hopkins. But we did win you back in 1990 to be the Director of Eye Services at the Royal Victorian Eye and Ear Hospital, and also the Ringland Anderson Professor of Ophthalmology. Oh, I can never actually say it, it's very hard. Help me, Hugh. Ophthalmology. I need some vocabulary training around ophthalmology. And Chairman at the Department of Ophthalmology at the University of Melbourne, where we've pretty much kept you, apart from a few little jaunts over to Cambridge and England, we've kept you here both in 2008 as the Harold Mitchell Chair of Indigenous Eye Health and as a Melbourne Laureate Professor in 2011. Kerry's reflected on your many successes in your research around eye health and the very significant changes that you've made to many Indigenous lives throughout this country, which you'll be talking about tonight. Looking at your CV, I was awed at the level of publications that you have. Over 600 peer-reviewed papers, 36 books, 67 book chapters. You have contributed to 104 committee meetings related to eye health, 200 overseas meetings. You've supervised 24 research students to completion, and now you've been invited to 124 presentations, and this is your 125th. So I think this is an amazing career. You have given so much, and we look forward to hearing about your work tonight. So over to you, Hugh. I'll help get the slides up.
What an embarrassing introduction. A series of introductions, thank you. And you've certainly uncovered my misspent youth.
Hang on, I've just got to figure out how to get it going. There we go.
That's great. Thank you very much, Richard. And thank you, Kerry and John, for also the very generous words. And it really is a great pleasure and a great privilege to have been asked to give the McCaughey Oration. And am I not working? I thought I had.
Sorry. No, you are.
Move that up further. Is that? Somebody in the back row, can you hear me? Yeah, all right. So, as has been pre-announced, I'm going to talk today about some of the work we're doing on closing the gap for vision. But I'd like to start off with this slide, and as I recognise the traditional owners of this land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and their elders past and present and emerging, and also any other Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are here with us today. And this slide is important as it shows there were 240 language groups across the country 8 generations ago when European settlement started. But these Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people had been here for 2,000 generations before that, which gives a length of the history and involvement of our country that really, to me, is very important. It's also terrific that this is NAIDOC Week, and as Kerry very nicely said, the theme for NAIDOC Week this year is "Because of her, we can." And in some ways I think that's a great introduction to Jean McCaughey. Because of her, so many people can, and it actually works very well. And I'd like to give this photograph of Davis and Jean, and we've known them as family friends and the McCaughey's as family friends since the 1960s. And we used to have Christmas parties together. And then I went to Ormond College where Davis was the master and Jean was effectively the mother and really did a super job. And then when they retired, we were at Johns Hopkins and they stayed a day or two with us on their way to do a sabbatical at Princeton. And it was just before Liz, my wife, had our 3rd child. And a couple of days later, we got a call from Davis, "Look, I've booked the chapel. You must come up. We go to christen Ned up at Princeton." And so I've got a number of photos of Davis one way or another, but this was the only photo that I could find when I had Jean and Davis together. So I wanted to bring that as a very personal relationship, and their relationship together was very strong and important. I'd like to talk about the work that we're doing here, and as I think Kerry said and John, we've been really privileged to be here in these positions at the University of Melbourne, to have the support from the university, the School of Population and Global Health, the Centre for Health Equity, to be able to do the work that we're going to do. We started in 2008. We've got a small, dedicated group of people. We've got about 15 staff, some who work to make sure that we keep on track. Those dressed in orange are doing the work on trachoma, and those in blue are really doing our roadmap work that I'll talk more about and the diabetes. But we've been very fortunate to get very generous funding from private trusts and foundations and individuals, as well as more recently some trusts have some funds from the Commonwealth. But the private philanthropic funding has been so important to give us the flexibility to do what we need to do rather than being tied to research grants and the delays and inability to get that. So the work I'm talking about, we've been extraordinarily privileged to have the opportunity to do that. And our goal is to provide equity in eye care for the Australian Aboriginal people. And the start-off point of this was the National Indigenous Eye Health Survey that we completed in 2008, where we randomly selected sites across the country to examine adults and children to see what was the state of eye health of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And what we found is that the children actually have very good vision, have much less poor vision than non-Indigenous children. And in fact, healthy, young, adult Aboriginal people have much better vision, much sharper or finer vision than any other people in the world. So the tragedy of over the age of 40 to have the adults having 6 times more blindness than non-Indigenous Australians and 3 times more vision loss is absolutely unacceptable. It's a scandal. And the things that cause blindness are pretty straightforward that we can treat or prevent. In fact, 94% of the vision impairment was unnecessary. It was avoidable or treatable. And a third of the people had never even had an eye exam. And when we look at the causes of vision loss, there are things we know what to do and how to do it. With cataract, we just need to provide cataract surgery. For people with diabetes, they need regular eye exams and treatment if they have problems. For people with refractive error, we just have to provide a pair of glasses. And for trachoma, which I'll talk about a little bit more, there's a WHO recommended strategy, the SAFE strategy, that has led to the elimination of trachoma in a number of developing countries already. So getting rid of blindness and vision loss in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is not rocket science. It is straightforward. And much of it can be fixed overnight. With glasses, you see right away. And if we do cataract surgery, you're going to see the next day. So this is something we can actually eliminate. It's not like heart disease or kidney disease or some of those other chronic problems which you need to treat day after day after day for the rest of the person's life. This stuff we can do. And people said, oh, well, vision loss is not important. We've got to worry about the hearts and the lungs and the kidneys and all those other things. But in actual fact, vision loss caused 11% of the health gap. Heart disease is number one, diabetes number two, trauma and vision loss were equal third, and then alcohol and stroke. And if things stay the way they were, there are about 15,000 people, Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander people with visual impairment, and that would have doubled over a 20-year period. But if we actually implemented and did things properly, we could reduce that number down to 2,000 and make a huge impact. And so that was our goal as to how could we do that. And I want to start off talking about trachoma, because this is an ancient blinding disease that has been around for a long time. And this is where in the early 70s I got led astray by Fred Hollows, working on the National Trachoma and Eye Health Program, and some people would say I've been astray ever since. But trachoma is this blinding infection where you have repeated episodes of infection passing from one person's eye to another. And you need repeated episodes of infection to cause the problems, and the estimate is you probably need 150 to 200 episodes of infection to have enough damage to cause blindness. So trachoma is totally different from the other chronic infections like hepatitis or TB or malaria or HIV, where you get infected once and you've got a problem for life. Trachoma is a totally different disease. It's these repeated episodes of reinfection. And that means these children, almost all this infection occurs in the first 5 to 10 years of life. So these children being infected 2, 3, 4, 5 times a month. So frequent episodes of infection from infected eye secretions. And so the disease, it gives you follicles, which are white lumps you can see in the top left-hand slide. You get a lot of inflammation and very angry. It's sort of like having tonsillitis under your eyelid. But with time, and the longer you have the inflammation, the more severe it is, you get the bands of scarring underneath the eyelid. And with time, those scars contract and pull on the eyelid and pull the eyelashes in and start to rub on the front of the eye, which is extraordinarily painful, but also causes opacity and blindness, scarring of the cornea and blindness. And most of the infection, and these are data from Australia that we collected in the 70s, which is just representative, most of the infection is in young kids, the scarring occurs progressively, and the blindness comes on in older ages. And so WHO has put together this SAFE strategy. It has surgery to correct those inturned eyelashes, antibiotic treatment to reduce the infection, the promotion of facial cleanliness to stop transmission, and also the environmental improvement to help the hygiene. Now, from a public health perspective, these are entirely the wrong order. We should start off with the environment, the social determinants of health, to talk about health promotion, then maybe medical treatment and surgery last. But EFAS is not anywhere nearly as good an acronym as SAFE, and so that's what we're stuck with. And the original WHO data had all this as depicting African families. And we took this up to some of the communities up in the Katherine region, and they said, they don't look like us. So we then spent a lot of time working with them to get the teaching material and training material so it fitted in with the Aboriginal structure. And these are data that were released last week from WHO to show that there are 165 million people worldwide now with trachoma. It's a bit hard to see all this stuff, and because it's WHO, half of it's in English and it's all repeated in French, which just makes it even more complicated. But already there are 10 countries that have eliminated trachoma in the last 20 years since this program has started. And most recently, 2 weeks ago, was Ghana, and the week before that, Nepal. So a whole lot of countries have eliminated trachoma. And Australia is the only developed country to still have trachoma. And the antibiotic treatment, although trachoma is caused by chlamydia, a bacteria, antibiotic treatment is not enough. It only reduces about 95% of the infection, and so if transmission is still possible, the rates of trachoma will just bounce back up again. And when you look at the houses in these Aboriginal communities usually start off with good facilities. And the photograph on the top right there, you can see there's solar hot water, there's electricity, there's working plumbing, even satellite TV. But the problem is they're not properly maintained. And if you have a house designed for 4 or 5 people and you have 20 people staying there, no wonder the toilets get blocked or the taps don't work or something. And then if you have to wait 3 or 6 months for it to be repaired, because these are all rental houses, you've got real problems. So our key message for trachoma really is clean faces and safe bathrooms, by which we mean safe and effective, safe and functional washing facilities. Because every child with a dirty face is a health hazard. They've got the risk of passing the infection from their eyes, or because the tears drain through the nose, from their eyes or nose, to their little brothers and sisters when they're playing together or sleeping on the same mattress or running around. So the key is to stop transmission by keeping every face clean. So as I said before, we spent a lot of time with the community, particularly up in Katherine and then more broadly in Northern Territory, WA and South Australia, developing health promotion materials. And we built it around this goanna. And the people up at Yumandamu said, what's the goanna's name? We said, we don't have a name. And they said, well, we've got to give it a name. So they gave it the Walpurgis name for eye. So it's Milpa, the trachoma goanna. And that's been uniformly badged now on everything. And some work we did shows that, that Ninty One, an Aboriginal research group, did showed that 86% of people in the communities know and recognise Melb and what the message is. So there's been a whole series of material, information kits, videos, songs, DVDs, and all sorts of activities in schools to get the message out. And some of the community events include this Yamba Milpa Roadshow, and Yamba is the honey ant that's the host of the children's TV show, a little bit like Big Bird on Sesame Street. And so that's been really successful. We've also had a wonderful collaboration with the Melbourne Football Club. You know, the football players are real heroes in these communities, have tremendous recognition and appeal. And so we've had a number of players every year act as, from the Melbourne Footy Club, act as trachoma ambassadors. So they've done videos and TV programs and radio slots and things like that. But more importantly, have gone out to communities to run footy clinics where they teach the kids how to mark and kick the ball and so forth, but also the importance of good hygiene and clean faces. So that's been a wonderful collaboration. We've also done work with the Indigenous hip hop group and getting health promotion murals painted. The one there is on Warburton in Western Australia in the goldfields on the company store. We've now got, I think, 11 murals in 11 communities, giving the daily reinforcement of the message of clean faces, strong eyes. And as I said, one of the real problems now with trachoma is the safe and functional bathrooms. So we're working with housing, Department of Housing and Education to make sure that we have proper washing facilities. And you can see that the two bottom photos here are in schools. One, there's a terrible trough or sink stuck on the outside of a wall that doesn't work. And in the other one, there's 3 lovely basins with lovely taps, but none of them have got handles. The kids can't use them. But the top photo shows a lovely photo of one of the bathrooms in WA where everything is there and works. And so we're really trying to get that in all the schools. And there's also been, if you've ever wondered what happens to the soap you left in the hotel when you checked out. Well, recently Rotary's been going around collecting that and then taking it and reprocessing under the brand of Soap Aid. And then we've got the Soap Aid to put the Milper logo impressed into it and getting that distributed out into a number of the communities, particularly in WA, with a Squeaky Clean Kid program, as again bringing that broader hygiene message to improve health. And part of that also has been developing a safe bathroom checklist so that people can know how and where to get proper attention when the tap doesn't work or the toilet's blocked, because as tenants they're not allowed to touch any of the infrastructure themselves. It has to be fixed by the contractor. And there are all sorts of gaps there. So we've been working with Prime Minister and Cabinet and then the jurisdictional or state and territory education and housing departments and things to really try to address that. And we're having success. These are the data up to 2016. The 2017 data are just being released. And we've gone from a rate of 21% in 2008 and the 2017 data are down to 3.6%. So we're making some real progress. We've still got a lot of work to do to achieve the goal of the elimination of blinding trachoma by the 2020. We've got 32 and a half months and nobody's counting much. But the real answer here is the clean faces, safe bathrooms. But looking at the broader issue of eye care and the results of that National Eye Health Survey were quite astounding. It showed that the unmet need for eye care is the same in Fitzroy, where I live, as it is in Fitzroy Crossing. Now in Fitzroy Crossing, we clearly need to have more optometrists, more ophthalmologists, and a whole lot of other things. But the Victorian Aboriginal Health Service in Fitzroy is less than a mile from the Royal Victorian Eye and Ear Hospital, the largest eye hospital in the Southern Hemisphere. So you don't need more staff. What you need is the linkage, the coordination, the utilisation, the cultural safety, all those other things to make sure that those services are used. So we then did a lot of research over a couple of years with a lot of people from the School of Population Health helped us with this, which was terrific. And we studied the patient journey or the pathway of care, and we ended up saying it's like a leaky pipe. The passage from having a problem, going to primary care, seeing an optometrist, ophthalmologist, sitting on a waiting list or what have you. There were lots of gaps where people could fall through the system. And if you only plugged one or two leaks, the pipe is still leaking. You actually had to fix all the leaks. And so we're really concerned about making sure we got equity in eye care. So we used this health systems approach and an evidence-based approach so that we knew we were on firm ground. The ideas and thoughts we were looking at were based in primary care, and obviously community engagement and community ownership is critical. We had to look at a multi-sectoral, we were ophthalmologists, optometrists, then we were sort of talking about housing and education and PM&C, so it really gets all sorts of things. Multi-level, primary care, secondary care, and a multi-strategy design. So it was a fairly complex approach. We had to make sure there was cultural safety and the services were appropriate, locally acceptable and appropriate, and there needed to be accountability built into it. There's no point in having a great plan, even if everybody signs on to it, but nobody's held to account to measure what's actually happening. So we said you had to fix each of those leaks. We ended up with 42 leaks. And they fell into 9 major groups. But as I said, it was a multi-layered and it involved national oversight, statewide support, but particularly focusing on regional implementation to try to get the service provision down to as low a level as we could, so it was easily accessible and people were comfortable getting there. There's no point in sending somebody from the Gulf of Carpentaria down to St Vincent's Private Hospital to have cataract surgery, as happened about 5 years ago. So we looked at what were the steps for regional implementation. And first of all, you had to define the region. That's really, the lowest you can go down is a safe operating theatre to do cataract surgery. So the hub of a region is really somewhere, a hospital you can do cataract surgery. And then you need to establish this regional collaborative network of stakeholders and partnerships. It has to be worked in partnerships with the Aboriginal community, the hospital, the local optometrists and ophthalmologists, other visiting services, to really coordinate that, to establish what the population-based needs are and what's the gap. What are the current services and what the services should be, to develop the way that people can refer patients effectively and efficiently and have appropriate local coordination and case management. And then put together the system so the region itself can monitor how well they're doing and provide that sort of oversight. And so we've developed a whole lot of resources to help the regions with checklists and different pages, including some of the online toolkit that lets people calculate for a given population what are the needs. And that's online, so if you have a particular population, you can put it in. But this is a worked example that if you had 10,000 people in a region, there are about 600 who need an eye exam for glasses every year, about 1,000 people who have diabetes who need to be examined every year, and so on and so forth. To do all that, you need one full-time optometrist. For the work that comes out of that, the people who need laser or cataract surgery and so forth, you need about 0.3 of an ophthalmologist. This is for 10,000 people. And to make sure everything worked and all the coordination and support and case management, you need about 8 or 8.5 full-time equivalent people involved in different components. So you can look at that and see, well, in this particular region we need 200 optometry days, but we've only got 70, so we need to increase it. We need 70 ophthalmology days, but we've only got 25, so we need to increase it. So it gives you a measure to actually get what you need. There's no point in saying, oh, well, we don't have enough services. We got 7 days of somebody here. Let's increase it to 9. Oh, that'd be terrific if it actually needs to be increased to 30. So it's getting that evidence-based and population-based needs were very important. And also looking at the development of eye care pathways. And one of the areas we really focused there was on people with diabetes. And everybody with diabetes is at risk of going blind. And we can stop 98% of that blindness, 98% of it, by timely treatment. And the only way you know to do the timely treatment is make sure people have regular exams. And so Indigenous people with diabetes need to be examined every year. And they may have retinopathy, the retinal change to the back of the eye, where they need to have laser treatment or injections. They may have cataract. They have an increased risk of having cataract, people with diabetes. So you need a referral process for cataract. Or they may just need a pair of glasses because diabetes can change your refraction of the eye and mean you need a new pair of glasses. So if you build the pathways to provide proper eye care for somebody with diabetes, you're putting in the pathway for the treatment of the retinal changes, but also for cataract surgery and glasses. And those are the same pathways that people who don't have diabetes will use. And the people with diabetes form 3/4 of the people who need to have an eye exam each year. So not only focusing on diabetes gives you the building of the necessary referral pathways, it's also addressing straight off 3/4 of the problem. And so one of our big things we did, we were really pleased to get, was a new Medicare item number for retinal photography to be done in the Aboriginal health services and primary clinics, and to get the government then to provide retinal cameras to these IMS to roll out about 140 retinal cameras so that they can actually be taken and used. And this has been a huge advance in that screening. And so it's one thing to have the service, but the other thing is people have got to know about it. And the clinic staff also need to know about it as well. So we spent a lot of time working with the communities to develop resources around the need for eye exams, particularly for the people with diabetes. And we spent time working with a group out in the Grampians as a regional group, a group up in the Brisbane metropolitan area as an urban group, and another group up at Wiluna up in the Kimberley as a remote area, to develop and get them to design and draw and also put together messages and videos. And we developed again a complete suite of diabetic eye exam resources based on the art and the wording and the design and feedback we got from that community consultation. Trachoma, we could work just in the remote areas because that's where trachoma is. But with diabetes, it's right across the country, so we needed to make sure we had the urban, regional and remote involvement so we were getting suitable messages. And we've also developed a series of online training modules for the clinic staff and GPs and other people about diagnosing and recognising diabetic retinopathy, and a series of material to help with the rollout of this new Medicare item number, including simple steps for the clinic staff to go through the eye check, and including the little vision test cards that they can use in almost a disposable way. This work, success has many parents and failure has but one. And the success we've had with this has been because of the partnership and working with a wide number of groups. And they range from Rotary, which is doing a great job in the trachoma, through to the various non-government organisations like Brian Holden, Fred Hollows, Vision 2020 Australia, the professional bodies like Optometry Australia or the Royal Australian College and Australian New Zealand College of Ophthalmologists. And so we've been having bringing everybody together so we can see where we are. And we had a meeting in March this year, our third annual meeting, where we had something like 160 people all working on Indigenous eye health coming together to see where we were, what were the issues and how we can move further forward. So there really is a lot of involvement and engagement with a wide group of people as we move this further on. But the real thing is we're making some really good progress. And since we launched the roadmap in 2012, we've had an annual update just to keep the bastards honest and just to show where we're going. And I think it's that reporting and accountability is really important. And this was launched the end of last year, and we had Fred Chaney, our previous leader, Minister for Indigenous Health, and also was the chair of Reconciliation Australia for many years, launched this with the president of the College of Ophthalmologists, the CEO of Optometry Australia, and the CEO of Vision 2020 Australia. So that's with the group photo. But I don't expect you to read any of the things there, but the boxes in green have been done. The boxes in yellow are works in progress, and the boxes in red are still to be done. The message is we've got the first step done on every one of those 42 recommendations. Overall, we've got 2/3 of the intermediate steps done, and more importantly, there are 16 of the 42 recommendations that are fully implemented. So we are making some real progress in getting this absolutely cockamamie or insane task of trying to get 42 changes in government policy. We are making some really good progress. There's still more work to do, but we are on the way. And this shows where we are with getting regions up and running. This was towards the end of last year. And our goal is by the end of this year to have all the regions in green. So there's actual activities going on and running there. And we're making some very good progress with that. We've got a team up in Queensland at the moment. And so if I colour this in today, all of Queensland would be green. So we're making some really good progress in that. And the key is to document the progress. So one of the things we're able to do is to get the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, AIHW, to put out an annual report on Indigenous eye health. So these are government data. These ain't some professor from an ivory tower south of the Murray, spouting off. When they're government data, they have to look at them and they get sent to the Australian health ministers and also to COAG, the heads of government. And there's the eye sheet that came out showing the 2017 data. But the most important thing is the National Eye Health Survey was repeated in 2016. And it showed that we'd taken the rate of blindness from 6 times down to 3 times. That is phenomenal. That's real progress. I mean, it must be the only closing the gap target that's really making progress. We've still got problems, there's still more work to do, but we are actually making some real progress. I'd like to just, as I close up, just to summarise some of the lessons learned. We've been working unabashedly on eye care, but what we're really doing is we are linking primary care with specialist services. And if it works for eyes, it'll work for ears or hearts or lungs or kidneys or other specialist services. So the key lessons for us is that the sector needs to speak with one voice. It's really important that when you go to a minister or a secretary in the department, if you say, oh, listen, we should do A, and then tomorrow somebody else from the sector comes in and says we should do B, and next week somebody says, oh, no, that's all wrong. What we really need to do is G. They say it's too hard, just walk away from it. So you need to make sure you have the service providers, the various non-government organisations, and of course the Aboriginal Community Controlled Health organisations, making sure you're speaking with one voice. And you also need to be looking at a national solution. This really requires Commonwealth funding for most of the work. All of Medicare, all the Aboriginal health, all that sort of stuff, Commonwealth. And so you have to make sure that the people from WA and Queensland and Tassie are all on board as well. And so you need to focus on, you need to be presenting solutions, not problems. The policymakers have got more than enough problems. They don't want more problems, but what they want is solutions. And the health systems approach is really important because there's not a silver bullet. There's not one thing to do. They're not the top 3 things that should be done now. You actually need to do the things that need to be done. And the key is really to focus on what needs to be done rather than how it gets done, so that the local arrangements or the regional considerations or the way the state does this or the state does that, as long as they reach the what, they get that done, the actual mechanism they use can be variable. So that gives the flexibility to implementation. And so I think that one has to base the approach on the community controlled sector. And you need to provide care as locally as possible. And that's where this regional model and the stakeholder partnerships are so important. Services must meet the population-based needs, and you need to make sure there's appropriate local service coordination and case management. And you've got to have that monitoring of performance, that accountability. If it's not counted, it's not done. If it's not measured, it can't be managed. So, in summary, Indigenous Australians have so much unnecessary blindness and vision loss. There really is a gap for vision. And there's much that we can address this. We really need to look at the provision of equity in eye health care. And the recommendations in the roadmap have made some really good progress. They work. The recommendations clearly work, and we've been making some good progress. So we still have more work to do, but we are very confident that we can close the gap for vision. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hugh. We do have some time for questions. If anybody has any questions at all, I've got some mics.
Thank you, Hugh, for a very impressive presentation of serious progress. I've been watching it for the last 25 years, and yes, it's indeed very impressive. But there's one thing that you have not referred to, and I think it's a real disgrace, is the role of the elders whom we've been paying respects to here hypocritically every time, but seems to me that they are the real bottleneck in allowing you to make progress.
Yeah, I don't see it that way, Tony. And I should say, I first met Tony in 1965 as a first-year medical student in a med physics lecture. And suddenly I realised that there were a whole lot of stuff we didn't know. At school, you were taught you know everything. And suddenly Tony opened my eyes up to there was a whole lot of research questions. So I really appreciate that question, Tony, and for you lifting the scales from my eyes at a very tender age. I think it's much more complicated than that, and I don't know if Kerry wants to talk about it, but it would take a long time maybe to unpack. But there's a lot of constraints about what they can do, and in the housing, for example, people are powerless, are forbidden by law to tamper with the plumbing. Now, in the communities, you'll find 2/3, 3/4, 80% of the kids have got clean faces, do not have trachoma. And so it's usually not a lack of knowledge about the goodness of hygiene, but often an impediment to do it. And so that's a problem they can't overcome on their own. Cultural safety for accessing services, whether it be in a clinic, a private practice, or in a hospital, the elders can't really do much about it. They're as embattled and disempowered as the rest of the community. And so it really is that complex interaction to build that up.
Hugh, a great presentation. Thank you. The bottom line for me is that graph that you've got up there that shows that I think you said last year 3.6% of Indigenous kids
In the endemic areas.
have
Trachoma.
Now, can you just sort of evaluate that position for us? Because in a sense, it's a very low number, but it's not coming down very fast, is it? And we have got these 2 years or less than 3 years to reach our target. So, can you give us a sense of whether we're going, whether the current activities will get us there?
We're down now to very small numbers and a number of small communities. I think it's about 16 or 18 communities. Some of them have only got 10 kids. So if you have 3 of 10 kids with trachoma, the prevalence is 30%. But so if you average it all out, it's down to 3.5%. But there's still these number of hotspot communities where we really are working hard. And if we can make sure that we continue to do the antibiotic treatment, which has given us a lot of that big drop already, but to stop ongoing transmission of infection with clean faces and the safe and functional washing facilities. I mean, if we could keep every kid's face clean, we should be able to eliminate trachoma by Easter. I used to say at the start of the year, I said by Christmas, but we're 6 months further in. But certainly by Easter, you could eliminate trachoma if you could keep every kid's face clean. And that means making sure that the message is there and they've got the functional washing facilities. And that's what we're working hard on, as you know.
There's a question up here, Hugh.
Yeah, hi, Hugh. Used a phrase a couple of times, cultural safety. I haven't heard this before. What do you mean? And how does it get in the way?
Sorry?
You used the phrase cultural safety, and I haven't heard that before.
Yeah.
What do you mean, and
what
how does
I
it get in
mean
the way?
There's a lot of institutional racism that is sometimes overt and sometimes covert. But nevertheless, people do not feel, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people do not feel safe or welcomed in a particular environment. And it can be in the way words are used or the way, it can be all sorts of things. And there are a number of things that people can do. I mean, people talk about cultural awareness, and that's one thing. It's one thing to be aware, it's another thing to actually practice it. But it's also making sure that the booking system works for the Aboriginal people, or that, often it's things like putting up some art in the waiting room. And it's making people feel comfortable so they can be there with their children or with their elderly person rather than being told, you wait outside. So there's all sorts of little things like that. So it's actually taking that cultural awareness a couple of steps further to make it really practical changes in the way people behave. Sorry, David. Yes.
Hugh, thanks very much and congratulations on the fantastic progress. I guess I'm just interested in where the Commonwealth is at and whether you feel there's the commitment to take closing this gap right through to its completion. And I realise that's not just for eye health, but health generally. Thank you.
Greg Hunt, the Health Minister, has been very supportive of Indigenous eye health since he was a backbencher. And he's spoken a number of times in Parliament before he became Minister for Health about that over the years. And so he is very supportive. And Ken Wyatt, the Minister for Indigenous Health, also has his own personal experience in Indigenous health areas, but is also very committed. The difficulty is they want a one-off thing that they can do now quickly and get results. but it actually has to be this more complex, integrated thing. So they tend to cherry pick a little bit what they do here and what they do there, and so it's an ongoing discussion. There's also been some discussion about using the Medical Research Future Fund to provide a mission for Indigenous eye and ear health. And a meeting we had a month or so ago with Commonwealth, I said, look, 94% of this vision loss is unnecessary because we know how to prevent or treat it now. What we need to do is get on and do the service work. We don't need to sit down and invent a new gene or a new laser or something. What we need to do is get out and provide the service. So there's again a bit of discussion there about what's sexy to announce to the public in a media release and what's actually needed to get the services delivered. But the commitment is there if we can help them find the way to get the service provision provided. We've got a couple of questions over. Richard, there's a question.
There's just a question here first, and then...
Hugh, I'm wondering if you're making any attempt to measure any additional benefits from some of the measures that you're implementing, the clean faces and operational bathrooms. I mean, does that prevent any other infections? Or?
We haven't been measuring that ourselves, but you can't wash your face without washing your hands. And we know that the antibiotic treatment, the clean faces, and we had in passing, I showed our 5-step hygiene card, which is blow your nose, but actually it's not blow your nose. Blow your nose until it's empty. So it's making sure you get the result. Blow your nose until it's empty. Wash your hands with soap. Wash your face whenever it's dirty. Don't share towels, and brush your teeth twice a day. So it's actually a 5-step hygiene message. And that will have an impact not only on trachoma, but otitis media, upper respiratory, lower respiratory tract infection, and skin infection. And from the skin infection goes on to rheumatic heart and glomerulonephritis, kidney failure. So it actually has a broad impact in that way. And so we know, and we're working with the other hygiene health promotion messages, but we don't have the resources to actually do the measurement of all those other conditions. The other thing is, if you can get your blocked drain fixed up in 24 or 48 hours, then the mechanism to get the broken window or the door that fall off the hinges fixed up will be the same too. So the work on getting the house maintenance done actually is much broader than just the health hardware. And finally, as I said towards the conclusion, what we're really doing is linking primary care with specialist services. So the lessons learned and the approach is being looked at and modelled by a number of these other specialist physician service providers. So we're very aware of our broad coattails, but you've got to keep it simple in terms of data collection. Yes.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm interested to know about some of the communication issues you might have had early on in terms of different cultural assumptions and language issues, what those kind of things might have been and how you addressed them and what you learnt from that.
Well, I think the biggest problem we had was our initial survey where we wanted to go to 30 sites. We had to get 72 ethical clearances and approvals. And it's that sort of bureaucracy and problems that makes this sort of nationwide data collection really hard. That's at one level. Now, of course, as I said before, we spent a lot of time talking in community to make sure the messages were suitable and appropriate. In the towns and regionals, most people will be fairly comfortable with English. In the centre areas, the outback areas, that's not true. And so we've got quite a lot of the material, particularly the TV and radio messages, but also some of the printed material translated into local language to make sure that it's there. But a lot of it is graphic, so that people see and recognise the graphics and get the visual message without worrying about the words so much. And one other thing we've done is a lot of the posters that we have got a set sort of surround or outline, but people can change the photographs. So people have been customising them, changing things and putting them up in language, but also having photos of the kids being screened or little bar charts or people charts showing what was the number of people who had trachoma and stuff like that. So a lot of community ownership of some of that material.
We've probably got time for just a couple more, but there's somebody just up the front.
Just one more here.
Thank you, Professor Taylor, for the presentation. I was just wondering, in terms of the collaboration of the mothers and the importance that that can play in that sort of baseline, the facial cleanliness, what does that look like in terms of early education for the children?
A very important component. I mean, it's the mothers, it's the aunties, it's the grannies. It's because a lot of in these remote areas, a lot of the children may stay in 2 or 3 different houses through the week with the extended family. And so it's not as though it's a single biologic mother, but it's sort of it takes a village to raise a child. And so it's getting the message out to the parents. And so one of the things we do is work with in the mothers and babies clinics, in the program they have in the territory of the families of first teachers, and then in the preschool and daycare, as well as through the schools. So as many different ways as we can get to the mothers and those extended carers as well.
Thanks, Hugh. Time for one last question, if not. Great. All right. Well, we might finish up. I'd like to thank everyone for coming this evening, and thank you for attending our event. Thank you to John and Kerry for your introductions, and thanks to the McCaughey family members who attended. And thank you, Hugh, for delivering this year's oration. Thank you very much. So thank you, everyone.